Very good morning, everyone. Happy Independence Day. So, the talk that we are discussing here today is Lost in Interpretation, a practical application of the right to equality. Now, the purpose behind choosing this topic is as noble and as sacrosanct the right to equality sounds under the Constitution of India, its application in reality has been very different. There are still various sections of communities that are subject to abject discrimination based on gender, based on caste, sexual minorities, and judgments. If we see in this regard, has also been very. It has not followed in a standardized process, right? While there have been judgments like Suresh Kaushal was a NAS Foundation, which is part of Delhi High Court. There have been judgments like Navtej Singh Johar as well. So it has been very different in this regard judgment. That is what the purpose of today's talk is, where we will be discussing about how the right to equality under the Constitution is applied in the grassroots, and how judgments of Supreme Court or High Court has played a significant role in this regard. And the talk will be delivered by Professor V.S. Elizabeth. She has been a Professor of History at NLS Bangalore for 34 years, and she has also been the Vice-Chancellor of NLU Trichy. Yes, handing over the stage to me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today to share my thoughts on the topic that you have identified. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning. Happy Independence Day to everyone here. 79th Independence Day, as I just realized this morning. So the topic is Lost in Interpretation, understanding the practical implications of the constitutional right to equality, the gap between guarantee and the reality. I think just perusing the newspaper over the last 1 week, if not 1 month, gives you an idea of the kind of India that we have today. 79 years since independence, 75 years since the constitution came into force, and yet not everyone enjoys this right to equality. Those of us who are here in this room are very privileged, and we're a privileged minority because one, we have been able to access higher education. Two, we actually have a roof over our heads. We have nice employment, and the freedoms that we enjoy. We cannot really grumble about where India is today. 79 years ago, what India was and what it is today. We're not beneficiaries of the independence that India has got. But as you rightly pointed out, Indra, the fact is that not everyone is as blessed as we are. Most of our country, women and men, are at the receiving end of all the oppression that the makers of our constitution and those who fought in the freedom movement wanted to get rid of. It's very interesting when you read. So as a professor of history, I can't but reflect on history. So I'm going to do that a bit. What was the idea of the rights and the freedoms during the freedom movement, and then look at the Constituent Assembly debates, the constitution itself, and what's happened since. Focus, of course, being on the courts and their interpretation, but also to understand why is it that there is such a gap between the guarantees in the Constitution, which came into force in 1950, and the reality of people's lives today, 8 years after independence. Why is it the way it is? So one, when you read the newspaper, it's always, very disturbing. So the first thing I saw was I know untouchability is still very much around. The very fact that, people who clean our sewage and everything are Dalits. It's like 100% reservation there. Nobody wants to go and fight, for those jobs. And these people keep dying. One of the people who used to work at the Center for Child and Law at law school, he did a lot of research with empirical study on people who are cleaning, here. And the reality of their lives, right? It's not like they have been able to move beyond it. Generation after generation is stuck there. And we're talking about the progress, the development, and the fact that we are the 4th largest economy in the world, all these kind of things. When the reality for a lot of the people in this country, and when we say lot, it's not half even. We're talking about, more than half of our people are way beyond accessing any of these things that we are enjoying and we feel good about. So for me, that thing that struck me was, now in 2025, you can have a place in Tamil Nadu, in Karur district, where they were building a wall to prevent the scheduled caste community from accessing government land. And then of course you constantly keep reading about, the problem with accessing temples. But if you leave the temples around, which is bad enough on its own, the fact that we had the temple entry movement in pre-independence days and, Gandhi's own idea and everything. The fact that, they're building a wall to prevent access for scheduled castes. I mean, even before that I have read in Tamil Nadu. This is again the irony of, Tamil Nadu. So being in Trichy for 3.5 years was actually hearing at close quarters the kind of caste problems that existed. Because, we keep reading about the progressive, the whole Dravidian model that, Chief Minister Stalin talks about. I mean, I'm a great admirer of Stalin and the DMK, the work they've done. But the thing is that so many years, right, because it's more than 100 years of, Periyar's movement there, is that they failed to end caste discrimination. Then it is not a struggle between the upper caste and the Dalits. It is between the OBCs. I mean, everyone virtually is an OBC and the Dalits. And it is crazy to the end, as we have also read, right? Kevin, who was murdered simply because he dared to fall in love with our upper caste girl. And these are daily realities in Tamil Nadu. Maybe because they get reported, or whether Tamil Nadu is, for these reasons even more difficult. So that's one. So where is the right to equality or the fundamental freedoms for Dalits in India? On the other hand is women, right? We look at Kerala. Look at it as a very progressive state for women, higher education, most women are employed, all of those indicators. But when you look at the daily reality for women, sexual assault is pretty much common, and all kinds of sexual scandals you keep reading about Kerala, and involvement of people from the top, everyone, all officials and ministers are not involved in it. Two, dowry-related violence. There have been reports of, young women who have either killed themselves or been killed because of dowry-related violence. And we have laws to deal with it. So why is that happening? So where is this right to equality within the home? Right? And what have the courts have said about something like that? The third group of people that I was thinking about, and coming out again in the papers, is on the World Indigenous Peoples Day, was the Jenu Kurubas in Karnataka, who have been evicted from the forest, Nagarmale, which is their homeland, and they have been fighting for the last 14 to 15 years. They have produced all the documents, but forest officials refusing to recognize, because on the other hand, they're developing, all these resorts out there in the forest and not allowing people for whom the land means everything. Their life is connected to that land, from their day-to-day living, to their gods, to their religion, everything. And that struggle has been going on. Every time they try to think that they're treated as encroachers, because the forest department has failed to still recognize them as people who can dwell in the forest. So these are just a few groups that I have, just identified. There are several other groups like this, as you mentioned, the sexuality minorities, religious minorities, besides, of course, maybe here and there some language minorities as well. All in the name of development and progress. Who's benefiting from all of it? Where is these people's right to equality? So that is the reality of India, 78 years after independence, and on this, the 79th year. So what was the vision of those who took part in the national movement? Because we know most of them who participated in the movement were middle class, educated people largely, of course mostly Hindu, but you also had a lot of Muslims and Christians. It was when I was in Trichy I realized when historians talk about it being a mass movement, because when I used to read, I used to think, they just say mass movement. Like really, people stepped out and participated. But being in Trichy, and since I am a professor of history, it's like it was the way in which I was looking at Trichy in that period of time, and in Tamil Nadu, and especially because 75 years of independence happened when I was there. And we had this whole thing about celebrating the 75 years in different ways. So as a law university, in different ways we did it, but I also brought in the whole historical dimension. That's when I discovered it really was a mass movement. There were people who stepped out of their homes and went and got jailed. Ordinary people who then, of course, at the end of it went back to their ordinary lives. But a lot of ordinary people, common people, actually went to jail. Women, girls, boys and men, of course. And all from different walks of life. I mean, while I was in Trichy is when I also discovered my father was in Malaysia, born and brought up there. He came in the year of independence, 1946. The first independence, my father was there in Bangalore. So he was, when he was 10 or 11 years old, he heard Netaji speak in Penang and got greatly motivated by him. So that he volunteered to join the Balak Sena, which Netaji had set up, went for training during the war when the bombing is going on, traveled from Penang to Singapore for 6 months, he underwent training as a boy, 10 or 11 years old. Now I used to think that, okay, my dad's a very highly idealistic person, so I thought, okay, that's him, But when I was in Trichy is when I discovered, people from Trichy who had gone to Burma for jobs, they went to find work. They heard Netaji, and they forgot about the job search and joined the INA. Almost every home in Trichy, so 75 years, we identified 75 people, 75 families whose, members from their families who had gone to Burma for work, joined the INA. A few of their families, we felicitated them when we were celebrating the 75th year. So it really was a mass movement. They were caught up with the whole idea of not just freedom for the nation. They believed that this national movement, because of all the things that various national leaders spoke about, was going to transform society itself. That there is going to be a drastic overhaul of the entire society once India attained independence. Because side by side with the struggle for freedom from the British rule were all these various social reform movements that were happening. Some of which were under the aegis of the Indian National Congress, but there are several other organizations, all of them working hand in hand. And the revolutionaries, their talk, Netaji's talk, all of them talked about not just political freedom, they talked about a social revolution. That's where Bhagat Singh, so while Gandhi and the INC had a major role to play in terms of mobilizing a large number of people because it was a non-violent movement, you cannot forget the contribution of the revolutionaries and the INA. They instilled that love for the country because this country didn't exist right before August 15, 1947. But already to this idea of India, they got people to commit through the things that they said. And many of them meant sincerely. Today when people talk, we know they're just talking. They don't really mean anything. A lot of people in politics today aren't in politics for the purpose of serving the people, but for self-aggrandizement. But a lot of people who were then in the national movement participated out of their genuine concern for the society and their commitment, to these principles. Now, when you look at the national movement, what started it off was discrimination. If it wasn't for the British discriminating against Indian entrepreneurs, Indian officials, Indian middle class, we probably would not have had a national movement. But the discrimination, was the one that started it all off because it's a middle class. Because while we do have the peasants and the tribals who kept on fighting the British right from the beginning of colonial rule, which is why, when the farmers marched, when the farmers like here even, right, Devanahalli, they sat down, they got it. They haven't been doing it just now. They've been doing it for thousands of years. From the time they were kings to when there was colonial rule, farmers have protested. Sometimes they succeeded, sometimes they didn't. Especially under the British, they didn't because they didn't have that kind of weapons to deal with the British. Right? But they have been doing it. So while that struggle went on, the middle class didn't recognize it or deal with it. The middle class, took birth around about the middle of the 19th century. And for them in the beginning, it was a good thing. Like all of us are so gung-ho about, liberalization and the companies coming in and all kinds of fancy cars and everything. We don't need, right, hundreds of cars to choose one car that you want to drive. In my childhood days, Ambassador and Padmini were the only two available. There was less traffic on the road. The family went in the car. You didn't have one man driving a SUV and going around the city and then crying about the traffic jam. But while we are feeling so great about that, the reality is to understand that for the people who participated in the movement, it was something else. They were not fighting for these things. And leaders of the movement were always conscious about the poverty in which people were. That colonization had contributed to that, right? So it is when you, therefore, the discrimination from the British is what triggered off the middle class against the British. Because till then they worked with them, the traders, Tagore's family, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, all of them were working with the British. There are historians who have documented all of this now. But after that, government policies, because the British wanted to protect their financial investments. So the colonization became very severe. The backlash was severe. So the talk about, the so-called benevolent administration of Bentinck and the others was a period when the British believed that the British India colony could function as a subordinate trade partner. They will bring their goods and sell it here, they will take the raw materials out, and therefore, both can work together, even as, British India were dragged into the world capitalist market at that point in time itself, effects of which were found already impacting the agrarian and the industrial sectors because they didn't industrialize. But after 1860, they had exhausted this. What they had was money to invest. So they wanted to set up several, not heavy manufacturing industries, but where you put the parts together. And that's the reason why after independence we had to focus on heavy industries, because we didn't have any of the heavy industries. PHEL, BML, all of them were required. When the money has been invested, you want to safeguard the money, is stricter administration, more severe consequences for opposing the government, questioning the government. It's a point in time when they want to protect British capital, they did not allow the capital created by Indians to compete equally. And that's when for the first time during the First World War, they did give, some kind of benefit. Tatas were one of the first to benefit from that, but they withdrew that. It's in that background you got to understand why Birlas, etc. supported the national movement. It's not that they believed in the ideal of equality for everyone or in a socialist economy. But they supported it because it meant ridding ourselves of the British and creating our own nation state, our own economy, our own policies, which obviously then would benefit the native capitalists. It is with that intention, right? But even during this entire period, the thing that greatly informed and influenced the freedom fighters was what is happening in the West, right? The liberty, the equality, the freedoms that British citizens enjoyed, American citizens enjoyed. So that's a great influence, because you really can't go into Indian history to look for anything similar to what we're enjoying. Because even as Gandhi kept talking about the panchayat system, Dalits are excluded, women are excluded, so what kind of, panchayat are we talking about? If we had the panchayat raj that, Gandhi was envisaging, it would again have to be overhauling. There wouldn't have been women coming in. Till, the 73rd and 74th amendments, there were no women on any panchayat. Right? It is with that step that, though it was a token thing in the beginning, today, there are villages which are completely administered by women, to more than 50% women being, especially in southern India, where, because we have a long history of greater rights for women in land, etc., and greater freedoms. Therefore, you have most of the villages in southern India where it's not a big problem having women representatives in the panchayat. But if it wasn't for that, we really can't look back. Right? The one person who talked about equality was Basavanna. But then again, it is one community, and even they, by the colonial period, had Brahmanized. To the extent where, when the Widow Remarriage Act was being drafted, the British sent out, to all their Indian officers or employees in the British government, asking for their feedback. And the Lingayats were referring to widow remarriage like eating on the used banana leaf of someone. And said, we are not as forward as Brahmins because we allow widow remarriage. So, all the progressive elements that were there in the Lingayat community, which came from Basavanna's teachings, found no room by the 19th century. Right? So, that's the reason why, while there are certain things that they practice which might seem like equal, it isn't as if, on every front they are more equal than other women anywhere else. Right? So when we are looking therefore for these fundamental rights, it is a universal thing. It's not like the West always had it. For the West too, it is with the industrialization, it is with the coming in of capitalism that you have the entire journey towards equality. Till then, they're not talking about equality either. They had as much of discrimination against people, except that we had a unique system, the caste system that was created, which did not require slavery, per se, because you had the Shudras to do that, and the Dalits were always excluded. In the Western history, you have slavery, you have feudalism, where the serfdom existed. People didn't have rights. Women were completely subjected. They were property, which is right up to the 19th century, the idea of women as chattel. The whole idea of coverture, where a woman marries, she ceases to exist in law. Right? So these are things that did exist. It's only in the 19th century that the West itself is moving towards greater equality. In Britain, it's not till the 1870s that the working class men got the right to vote. Right? So inequality was pretty much the norm throughout the world. It is with industrialization, with modernization as a consequence, and capitalism, that we are talking about the language of rights. So it is that language that is adopted. And that's the reason why when you look at the national movement, one is the Nehru report, the 1928 Nehru report, not Jawaharlal Nehru but Motilal Nehru, who was the chairman of that committee. They present the report. Is the first time we see the articulation of these fundamental rights and freedoms. And a lot of it is reflected in the Constituent Assembly debates and also in the Constitution. A lot of it is, actually, because it's very much the same people, more or less, who also participate, if not same people, from the same background and from the same organization, the INC. And therefore, they echo the same sentiments. The other one is the Karachi Resolution of 1931, where they actually drafted the fundamental rights. Not in the same way which they came to be included in the Constitution, but pretty much, in that tenor. And so this is what Nehru, was saying in 1931 when the Karachi session happened, because they're very conscious of the fact that it cannot simply be political freedom from British rule. It also got to be economic freedoms. They were not greatly bothered by the social inequalities, gender and caste. It did, but like they do today, right? Every time we talk about child marriage or we talk about, untouchability, everyone talks about laws rather than dealing with the socio-economic transformation of the communities which practice child marriage or the communities that are subject to untouchability. Because everyone keeps saying it's long term, but the reason is that will be life transforming and a social revolution if you actually deal with the social and economic conditions in which these communities live, which are practicing or which are subject to these practices. And therefore, right then, middle class doesn't want to have a complete overhaul of the entire society. What middle class wants is greater equality, greater rights and opportunities for itself, and therefore they are happy to articulate the language of rights without it being, without it contributing to social transformation. Only Marxism and feminism talk about social revolution and social transformation. But during the days of the national movement, there were several people, because INC is not the national movement. INC is one of the organizations that were there, and there were several others. And so many of them committed to socialism. And many members of the INC themselves were at that point in time committed to socialism. So in their program, one was fundamental rights. The other was, as they called it, the National Economic Program. So unlike the idea of a new education policy, the NEP, what they talked about is a national economic program. They're very clear that the economic equality was the most important for the majority of our country, women and men. That they suffered as a consequence of the colonial rule, and therefore you have to do things in order to ensure that they're able to access the resources and the opportunities. So they said in order to end the exploitation of the masses, political freedom must include economic freedom of the starving millions. This is right in 1931. So the resolution guaranteed on the one hand basic rights, including equality before the law. So that's how they looked at equality. though in the CAD, the Constituent Assembly debates, there's a little thing about what does it mean, what does right to equality mean, equality before the law, what does that mean, and there are people who are a little thing, giving good reasoning, but again, slightly problematic in terms of what would happen in terms of impact. So they were not very comfortable with that. But in the Lahore resolution, this is there. Equality before the law, irrespective of caste, creed, or sex, and the neutrality of the state regarding all religions. That the state must, kind of step away from all religions, be neutral to all religions. 7th November 1933 to 29th July 1934 is a time that Gandhi undertook a tour of British India, what he called the Horizon tour, where his entire thing was about removal of untouchability. So Gandhi can be vilified on several counts, but I think you cannot take away from the man what he has done. You and I will not make the sacrifices he did. You don't have to like him. He didn't ask you to, but you have to acknowledge what he did. Because through this tour, right, like he did, another thing, he was a really smart man. When he came in, he was already in his late 50s. He didn't just jump into the national movement. For a year, he toured the entire British India to understand what was here. Because remember, he wasn't here for a long time. He was in South Africa. So when he came here was to study it. After studying it is when he began, which is why many of the methods he adopted are the methods of your farmers' movements. Satyagraha, no tax campaign, all of these are things that farmers had tried. Lagan, you've seen the movie, right? Gandhi didn't introduce these things to them. They did it. Gandhi adopted it. And Gandhi polished it, made it not merely an action-based movement, but also gave it a more spiritual orientation, which is something that the peasants did. So when you talk about lost in interpretation, Gandhi was lost in interpretation so far as the masses are concerned, which is why Chauri Chaura happened. To them, Gandhi was a messiah. They're used to it. The peasant movements have always had, the Santhals, etc. They have mobilized themselves against the British on this idea of a messiah or a savior who would come and liberate them from the British. So they look to Gandhi in that thing. So Gandhi's Horizon tour must also be seen in that. He created greater awareness about the problem with untouchability. And that's the reason why and Gandhi was, through the tour, he was targeted, opposed by hostile crowds. They said he was attacking Hinduism. Because it is attacking untouchability, which is at the heart of the Brahmanical system. Obviously, to them it seemed like he was attacking Hinduism itself. Right? And so that is again explains, Godse and the other things that happened subsequently. Because he's seen through his entire lifetime here as somebody who is opposing what was inherently Hindu. Right? And siding with people who are not part of this. So the Nehru report of 1928 again was concerned with securing fundamental rights which had been denied to Indians. Right from not being able to take the ICS to several other things that were happening. Army, you couldn't get promoted beyond, the rank of the subaltern. All the officers were always British, etc. Right? They wanted to end, therefore, the discrimination that was inherent to colonial rule. And from that, they moved on to liberty for all Indians. Liberty not being just political, because that would happen automatically once colonial rule ended, but liberty meaning, liberty from the social and economic discrimination, oppression that Indians face. And therefore, in the Nehru report, the desire was to afford protection to minorities. And the Nehru report is in 1928. This is after the Simon Commission, after the Muslim League has been formed, after Jinnah comes back into politics. Right? So at that point in time, the Nehru report is disturbed, right, by this. Even at that point in time, to keep in mind that the masses of Muslims are not part of the Muslim League. It is again the middle class, which is realizing that the Hindu majority government will always have only a Muslim minority. There is not going to be equality. And that's why they were fighting for special, concessions and provisions, and the electorates, why they agreed to the Minter-Morley reforms, the separate electorates which were created, as well as to the Montague cultural reforms. They wanted that, because without that, they knew they may not even get elected. It's not like you have Muslim majority areas where only Muslims will be voting and only Muslims will get elected unless you have separate electorates. But in that context, you've got to keep in mind who is voting. It's not the masses, because it's one of the other misconceptions we have, that the Muslims voted for Pakistan and the Muslims left. Why is India having the largest population of Muslims in the world? It's because the majority of Muslims chose to stay back. It's the middle class Muslims from UP, etc., who moved, which is why they're called the Muhajirs. And they're again not part of the community in Pakistan, because they're not from there. Right? The Punjabi Muslims and these have been in conflict within Pakistan. Right? So in that context, you've got to keep this in mind, that the majority of Muslims were not part of this. That's the reason why the Jinnah took the Muslim League to the next stage, which was to turn violent. To talk about Islam being in danger, to talk about the Quran being disrespected, and the Muslims going to be in danger, etc. Now, in that is a context in which the 1928 Nehru report came out, where they then talk about the right to freedom of conscience and to free profession and practice of all religions, and explicitly to talk about the need to prevent the domination, one community domineering over another. This is there in the Nehru report, and which is why even in the discussion that happened in the Constituent Assembly debates, this was very much there. Therefore, why we have the articles protecting, the freedom of conscience and freedom of practice of religion, which I'll come again to that a little later. Okay. Now, when we go to the Constituent Assembly debates itself, one of the members from the South, K. Santanam, at that time he was an editor of Hindustan Times, co-editor of Hindustan Times. He talked about the need for 3 revolutions that had to take place: the political, the social, and the economic. The political, he said, will be achieved once India attains independence. The social freedom, he said, is to get India out of the medievalism based on birth, religion, custom, and community, and reconstruct her social structure on modern foundations of law, individual merit, and secular education. Economic freedom, he said, was to transition from primitive rural economy to scientific and planned agriculture and industry. Thus, the task of the Constituent Assembly was to draft a constitution which would serve the ultimate goal of social revolution. Which is why some scholars have described the Indian Constitution as the Constitution for Social Revolution. And when you read it carefully, you will find that is what it is, a fundamental rights chapter, as well as the DPSP more importantly. And in the Constituent Assembly, there was not to be one superior to the other. The 2 chapters were to be read together. Ambedkar talked about it. The idea was that the state was to be informed by the directive principles. Unfortunately, of course, the parliament chose to separate them. And while, yes, in the constitution, the DPSP is non-justiciable, the idea was that all policies of the government would be informed, how you use your resources. The current model of economy is antithetical to the DPSP because it talks about using resources for the benefit of the majority. Control of the resources in the hands of the majority. It doesn't talk about, access only to a small group of people for their benefit, etc. Right? So the idea in the drafting of the constitution, so that's the reason why the structure of the government and everything was visualized the way it was. Whole debate that happened, should we go for a panchayat model or should we go for a parliamentary model? And in the end, they thought the parliamentary model was a better model, and which is the reason why they went with it. But the idea was the way everything, right? Division into the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature, that all 3 and the structures and provisions will ensure that the social revolution could happen. Now, in the discussion on the right to equality and this equality before the law is where these constitution makers, again, irrespective of their background, majority Hindu, majority men, majority upper caste, despite that, what I would respect them for is the acknowledgement of the reality of a British India at that point in time. They're not talking about an abstract equality, an idealistic country. They want to see these things happen in the future. What do you need to get there? If it wasn't for that vision, you wouldn't have Articles 15.3, 15.4. In the debate, they say, just because we say right to equality, it doesn't mean from tomorrow everybody will be enjoying equality. So you need to build into it possibility for the government to enact policies, to enact laws which can safeguard the interests of the marginalized groups. Because when we talk about equality as an equality of opportunity, as most people do, and they say, there's a level playing field, everybody starts from there. Point is, there is no level playing field for the majority. Right? If you remember school, right, when you have a running race, people who are smaller, people who have an injury or are disabled would be given a handicap. You go and stand 20 yards in front. The rest will stand, able-bodied people will all stand together. Now that is what is called leveling the field. If you tell everyone to start from the same point, obviously the ones who are already backward will fall behind. If all of us were to run, I don't think that you need to give prizes to anyone for guessing who's going to win the race. Right? People like me, I'm an old woman now. I'm not going to be able to run equally with all you youngsters. Right? And some of us who've been in training, some of us who have eaten well, we will be able to do better than those who have not had one square meal. So how do you draw the line and say everybody run? Equality of opportunity. That is like dangling food before those who are hungry and say, come run and get it. Can you? We've seen what happens when packets of food are thrown during floods and other such natural disasters. Who gets them? And so keeping this in mind, they included 15.3 and 15.4, which said, despite Article 14 and Article 15, right against discrimination, the government, the state can enact policies for women and children, Article 15.3 and 15.4 for other backward communities. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the 73rd and 74th Amendment, you wouldn't have all the other special legislations we have for women, etc. So the Constitution guarantees this right to equality not only in terms of equality before the law, but also equal protection of the law. And that is the thing that doesn't seem to have translated into practice. Even equality before the law for that matter. Some are more equal than the others because of their education, their awareness, and the money that you can afford, a good lawyer. I mean, the fact that Prajwal Revana is behind jail is, thank God, that, justice prevailed. But look at Darshan. So brutally killed, a man, and then he was out on bail, thanks to the Supreme Court. So these are all the good times, good decisions of the Supreme Court, the good decisions of, the Special Court. When we have quite a few of them. We cannot take away the role that the Supreme Court has played in expanding the understanding of these rights. Because at the end of the day, the Constitution is words. Every word is subject to multiple interpretations. Whether it's the English language or any other language. So how you interpret depends on who you are, what baggage you carry, what kind of awareness and sensitivity you have. And why we expect judges to be more sensitive, to be more conscientious than the rest of the Indian population is beyond me. As a student of history and social sciences, I am not surprised at the discriminatory judgments. The myth of objectivity and neutrality has contributed to this lopsided perception of the judiciary by the judiciary themselves and by the people. How can you have objectivity from any human being? All of us here. Right? We might be more caring about marginalized groups. That is subjective. It comes from our sensitivity and sensibilities or because of our experiences, personal and otherwise. And there are people who don't care, who have various arguments against the right to equality and therefore why the right against reservation. Right? This has evoked so much of sentiment, including, as we know, when the Mandal Commission report came out long before you all were born, but the time when people killed themselves for it. Whereas, in Tamil Nadu, people killed themselves over the language issue, imposition of Hindi, but in North India, it was over the caste reservation issue. It didn't happen in the South, because the majority of us in the Varna system are all other backward castes. The Brahmins are a minority because most of them migrated to the South. excepting for those who were incorporated from the local communities who were priests, etc. The majority of Brahmins who came down were invited, were given land grants. That's the reason why there was so much against the Land Ceiling Act. I think there was one, I wanted to actually, that there was one thing from, was it Pari? You know, that movement that, I forget, what is his name? He's a writer and he has come to law school even. The rural thing that they do, the rural studies. Sainath. Okay, that group that they do, the People's Archive that they're creating, and there they were interviewing a Professor Satish Dhawan, I think, from JNU, who talks about his family. He says, you know, those who are privileged deny the privilege and the entitlements that they expect. He says, I am who I am because my great-grandfather got land from the Peshwas, which, because he was not very smart in handling it, because, you know, many people, when the Land Ceiling Act came in, they redistributed the land in such a way as to see that they didn't lose much of it. He was not so smart and ended up losing some land. But in spite of it, he said, I am who I am because some of the land we had was sold to give my father and uncle an education. One became an engineer, another became a doctor. And because my father became an engineer, I went to the best of schools, the best universities, and ended up being a professor at JNU. So I can't say I have not privileged. How many of us acknowledge the privilege? That is the reason why I started with this. You know, people who are here, we're all privileged. Even if we may come from Dalit communities or other backward castes, nevertheless we're still privileged because there are our fellow, women and men who are nowhere near what we are enjoying. And Professor Satish Dhawan acknowledges this privilege. When you acknowledge that privilege, then you will not be resentful of reservation or the special policies that are aimed at elevating people or alleviating them from poverty. Right? And so when we look at the right to equality is how we understand it. So people, to a great extent, even the French Revolution, right to equality, they want to stop at equality of opportunity. Because when there's equality of opportunity, those who have will be able to equally compete with the Vodayars and the others. Right, with the royalty. Because still independence, it was a royalty which had that privilege. And of course the colonial rulers. But after independence, if you say equality of opportunity, those with wealth, with education, will obviously be able to get ahead. Even today, one of the things that I get very disturbed is when people keep talking about government schools and imposing Kannada language in the government schools. Kannada is a medium of instruction. Who goes to government schools? Not your and my children. The children who go to government schools are your Dalits, the tribals, and girls. Because everyone who can manage to get out or go to a private school goes to a private school. And why are these people clamoring? Because at the Center for Child and Law School, we had a right to education program, and our program worked with government schools. Our idea was to strengthen government schools, to ensure that the quality of education in the government schools was good, so that people who went there would have a fair chance at getting better opportunities. But when we talk about, imposing Kannada as a medium of instruction, I'm not against Kannada, I love the language. After English, that is the language I'm most fluent in, though it is not my mother tongue. But when we impose a language that the speakers of that language do not want, they're happy to learn as a language, they want English, because they see English as the means to the way out. So when we talk about reservation for scheduled castes, scheduled caste Christians and Muslims are outside of that. Because we think that they've all been able to, and to a certain extent they did. Scheduled caste Christians, got into the Christian schools, got an education, especially in Tamil Nadu, you'll see that. They got into the schools and then they also got better jobs. They didn't have to be, the people who are taking care of the work that was usually assigned to them. But not everybody benefited, depending on where you were. So you may have converted, believe in a different God, a different way of life, but it didn't change the reality. In Tamil Nadu, despite their conversion to Christianity, in their villages they still would be persecuted and harassed because they are Dalits. To the people in the village, they're still Dalits. Just because you changed your God doesn't mean, that you now become equal with us. So isn't that like that they are demanding that the same benefits be extended to the converts to Islam and Christianity? Because this untouchability and the caste discrimination is very deep-rooted and deeply entrenched. We are in 2025, we are making rockets that go fly off to Mars and Moon, but we have not forgotten our caste background. Everyone is very clear about their caste. Even when they field candidates, they're looking at who's a majority population in this constituency and field candidates on that basis. And people vote on that basis. So it is inherently then that we can't talk about untouchability as having disappeared. Article 17 says untouchability is prohibited. One statement in the constitution doesn't mean it has happened. It's an aspiration. The constitution is an aspirational document. And using it, you can go and fight for your rights. But doesn't mean that automatically all the discrimination and inequalities have ended. So it's important to realize this. So equality, what does it mean in daily life? What do people expect? The people, the masses who participate in the national movement, when they stepped out in the hope that all that discrimination, thank you so much, would end. With India attaining freedom. But the reality is that it didn't. Even the women who had all contributed to the movement, which is why there is a lull in the women's movement from 1947 till about the 1960s. Because they thought, now we have the constitution. By that time, remember, we also have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the world over, they're talking about equality between women and men. So they thought, this would automatically translate. 79th Independence Day, how many women are in parliament? Not even 25%. If women, Dalits, tribals and other minorities are not there in the parliament, in all decision-making bodies, how do you make policies that will be for their benefit? How do you look at what do they need? And there are very, very simple things, that people around here may not even think about as a need. And I just go back to the year 2000, when the National Population Policy, was being drafted, and the concern was about the growing population, despite all the population control measures since independence. So then they thought we need to now go to the panchayats, the villages, and let them take ownership, of this, so that we can start curtailing the population. That year, at the International Women's Day program here in Bangalore, women panchayat representatives were invited to a program where they were told that now the government is going to give, I think, about 2 lakhs per panchayat. How would you use this 2 lakhs? Do you know what was a uniform response from the women representatives? Panchayat members, so these are all from the villages. What did they want? What did they think they will do with 2 lakhs if they had it?
Tuberculosis.
Pardon?
Tuberculosis.
Toilets. We don't think about it. Even, I think, yesterday's paper carried the thing about a woman who had gone to relieve herself and, being sexually assaulted. 2025 India, 79th year of its independence, this is happening. Unless you have women there, right? What do the men want? Roads, street lights, education. These are all the things that the men talk about. They don't look at the basic things. Maternal mortality rate, while it has gotten better, over the last 20 years, India had one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. We're talking about right to equality. Don't these women have the right to live? These are all young women between the ages of, 16 and 29 who die giving birth, fulfilling their gender role in society. Society tells them that is your job, giving birth, and yet society does nothing to ensure safe delivery. Primary healthcare centers are not equipped. By the time they transport women, women die. So when we talk about right to equality, it means equal participation in decision-making bodies. And that's the reason why they did talk about 15.3 and 15.4 in the CAD debates. Right. Now the articles 14, 15, 16 and 17. On the one hand, we talk about the state obeying the Constitution's negative injunctions not to interfere with some of the liberties that citizens are entitled to. That's easily done. But there is a positive responsibility also given to the state, positive obligation to protect the citizens' rights from encroachment by society. And this is where the state has failed. Not just the legislature and the executive, but the judiciary also. They always tested against this. If the state is not violating your rights, if the state is violating your rights, all right, do something about it. But what about this positive obligation of the state to protect its citizens from the encroachment of their rights by society? Domestic violence, untouchability, communal violence, violence against, sexual minorities. What is the state doing? The lynchings, the bulldozing. Where is the state fulfilling its obligation to protect its citizens from the violation of their rights by society? Even the courts, occasionally the court has said, don't do it, but when they violate it, it doesn't hold them in contempt of court either. Whereas they use this contempt of court every time you criticize them. Right? The DPSPs, as I mentioned earlier, were even more clearer in the statement of how Articles 14, 15, 16 and 17. Because that's where it talks about the state's positive obligations. You want to transform society, you've got to transform it bottom up. It's not simply by declarations and it is not simply by making laws. Which is why, despite the Dowry Prohibition Act, which is now 60 years old, even today women are being killed or killing themselves because of dowry-related violence. Just 1 minute, because I have elderly parents, it's always, yeah. 1 minute. Yeah, hello Dad. Yeah, okay, where was I?
DPSPs, you talk about the directive principles of state policy.
Right. Yes, they spell out even better how this transformation was to happen, right? Structure from bottom up, not just through the laws, because this whole thing of laws, which is what is a very typical middle class liberal approach to wanting to end discrimination, is enact a new law. And we have a plethora of laws which have not ensured the exercise or experience of equality for those for whom these laws are meant. So when you look at the Supreme Court, so that is where the role of the Supreme Court comes in, because Supreme Court is there, like the High Courts, to safeguard the constitutional guarantees. Question is, how well have they safeguarded? And this is why here I want you to remember and always keep that in mind, is the fact that the judges are not neutral and objective any more than you and I are neutral and objective. The majority of them are Hindu, upper caste men. You cannot take that away. Their experience, again, I wouldn't say deliberately. A few may be deliberately, subverting the good laws, but the majority don't even know better. I asked you a simple question, right? I said, Panchayat women members, what will they want to spend 2 lakhs on? You didn't think toilets would be, on their priority list. Because you and I don't have a problem, right? Every room has a toilet in our homes. Wherever we work, there are toilets for us. What we fight for is okay, toilet for men, toilet for women, gender-neutral toilets. These are things we fight for. Toilets are not on an agenda. It's not like you make a special provision in your budget for building toilets. But for rural women, that is a reality because they have no toilets, and because of this whole idea of modesty of women, right? Men have no modesty. South Asian men are notorious for using the whole countryside to relieve themselves. But South Asian women don't do it, nor do women anywhere else. For the simple reason that modesty. So when do these rural women relieve themselves? Before the sun rises and after the sun sets, when it is dark. And then they're preyed upon, sexually assaulted, and besides that, of course, is as you grow older, you'll realize, right? Urinary tract infections, your kidney gets damaged, your bladder gets damaged, your reproductive tract gets infected. You develop other kinds of problems as a consequence of controlling yourself the whole day. Can you imagine it? I mean, I just traveled from home to here and I wanted to use the restroom. About an hour. We're talking about women holding. And so what happens is they don't drink enough water. I've seen that even women who are working outside consume very less water. Consequently, they have kidney stones and other problems. So the reason I'm talking about is that if you do not have that experience, how can you sit in the court and understand it? Simple thing, because right now I'm teaching a course called Unmasking the Institutions of Marriage and Family at Law School. And we were talking about the Special Marriage Act and restitution of conjugal rights, etc. Oftentimes the Supreme Court talks about misuse of 498A. I will get to that thing, but they don't realize there is a misuse of the restitution of conjugal rights. Men move the court for restitution of conjugal rights when the women ask for divorce or maintenance. They say, I'm ready to live with her, she is the one who doesn't want to, so they go file restitution of conjugal rights. Now judges, majority of them have been lawyers. So they know this is a lawyer's ploy to get the woman to drop this case, of wanting maintenance or custody. And instead, they actually award restitution of conjugal rights. Now, if a woman was to go to the court for restitution of conjugal rights, a man can, sit at home and say, go and forget about it. And then after a year say, we haven't lived together, so now grant me divorce. Whereas if a man files for restitution of conjugal rights, the woman will be compelled to go and live in a man's house. And he can forcefully have sex with her, resulting in her pregnancy and all the other consequences that follow. Why aren't judges thinking about that? That this man has asked for restitution of conjugal rights not because he wants to live with that woman, but because he wants her to drop the case for maintenance or custody or whatever else that she has filed for. The question is, these are men, privileged men, who do not think about the other side. What will be the impact? There was only one case I know. I don't know if there's been another case since then. This is from 1983. It is from the then Andhra Pradesh High Court, Justice Chowdhury, in the Sarita versus, forget his name, I had it. It's this is actress Sarita. Maybe you would remember Sarita as an actress, but I don't think you youngsters would. She was a very good character actress. Not very attractive, she was dark-skinned, she was a little stout, but a very good actress. She'd been married off when she was 16 or 17, and then, she went into the film line and become famous, and around that time, she no longer was living with this husband of hers, so he went to court asking for restitution of conjugal rights. Justice Chowdhury is the only one I have read till now, because there are good judgments and everything, but from a very woman's perspective, this is the only judgment. He looked at what would happen if he was to award restitution of conjugal rights to her husband. Given the unequal power relations in our society and within marriage, he said, Sarita could get pregnant and then, her whole career can come to a standstill and everything else. Very nicely, articulating it. On the other hand, the same year, soon after this judgment, was the case on the Delhi High Court. I think it was Harvinder Kaur versus Harvinder Singh, 1983, where the judge said, you can't have Articles 14 and Article 21, right to equality and right to life, in the home. That's like setting a bull in a china shop. What are you saying? That within the home, a husband and wife are not equals? That the woman doesn't have a right to life in marriage and family? And he was very critical of the judgment of Justice Chowdhury in the Sarita case. And the Supreme Court did not overturn this judgment, and I think it has gone on more or less to maintain that. So when we say right to equality, and I'm saying not always is a judge deliberately subverting, the rights of minorities or marginalized groups. It just comes from the experience. You know no better. I remember one judicial training at the National Judicial Academy in Bhopal, where when we were talking to them, the then director of the National Judicial Academy wanted to instill constitutional values in the judges, telling even district judges that you can uphold constitutional values. Because everyone thinks it's the High Court and the Supreme Court. Because you have, the protection of your constitutional rights, you can only move High Court and Supreme Court. And we were trying to tell them that no, even at the district level you can safeguard constitutional rights. And so we were talking to them about, sexual rights, sexual freedom and everything. And then you had judges, a woman judge who said, if my son has to ask his wife consent at every stage of their sexual relationship, where is the romance in that? And on the other hand, the director who had 2 daughters was like, I am afraid of my daughters being violated by their husbands if their husbands did not ask them if they wanted to have sex or not. So all of us are informed by our experience, who we are, and judges similarly. So please keep that in mind as you make advocacy, because we expect them to think, so you have to sensitize them before you can make your argument for the rights of the groups you represent. So some of the positive decisions we have seen over the past is the Geeta Hariharan case. They didn't change the law. Again, right, they were so hesitant. As judges, they were very conscious. Because you again got to keep in mind, Supreme Court judges are thinking about post-retirement, what happens. Nobody wants to go and sit at home and find other things to do, relax. People want to keep working, keep making money. So where will I get appointed to? Which commission will I be on? Which is why Justice Gawai right now at the outset has said, I am not looking for any appointment. So now I will give whatever judgments I think is right in my conscience. Because look at all the chief justices who did favor the government and where they are. And that will give you an idea. Not just the chief justices, even other Supreme Court judges. One of the lady judges, what was her name? The judge from Bengal. She headed the, No, R, Not Hindu Malhotra. Her name was in R. She was from Bengal. She just stepped down and went home. Didn't accept any positions in anything at all. Then you can, administer justice fearlessly. Otherwise, you are doing the thing like what is going to come afterwards. Because we've seen how judges are punished, leave alone appointment of judges to high courts and Supreme Courts itself, right? So the Geeta Hariharan case is good to the extent of at least acknowledging that the mother is also natural guardian. Again, talking about equality. And we are all concerned about Muslim women not being treated equals. We're talking about Hindu woman here who is not considered as a natural guardian. We all can know our mothers. Because unless somebody exchanges babies in the hospital, we know we have come out of her womb. Our father is who she says he is. And yet the father is a natural guardian and the mother isn't. Mother doesn't have rights over legitimate children. Over illegitimate children, sole guardian is the mother. So the Geeta Hariharan case, they acknowledged that yes, the mother can be natural guardian if the father does not object. Because the law itself is that father is the natural guardian, the mother comes only if the father dies. But at that point in time, that was seen as a good judgment because till then, in this case, all Geeta wanted to do, her son studied in law school, Geeta wanted to do is go open a bank account or a fixed deposit in her son's name. And the bank, Canara Bank said, we need the father's signature. At that time, they had filed for divorce and the case was in the court. She said, I'm the mother, he's living with me, why is my signature not enough? That's when she took this case as a writ petition to the court to challenge this provision. And the court, uncomfortable in striking down the provision, instead said that mother can be recognized as natural guardian if the father then existing has no objection to her functioning as a natural guardian. So at least it facilitated this with the father, where of course the father is fighting for custody, then he's obviously not going to accept it. The other one of course is the Vishaka judgment. For the first time, acknowledgement that sexual harassment at the workplace is a violation of the fundamental dignity, right to equality, right to life of women. Similarly, the Sukanya Shanta versus Union of India case 2024 about the caste-based discrimination which is happening in prisons. And the Supreme Court said you need to completely change that and end this caste-based discrimination. Did you know that in prisons, it's not enough you're discriminated outside. You go into prison and then the kind of work you get allotted will depend upon your caste. I don't know what Prajwal Remana is doing, but This is exactly how they're doing. This is like after independence, after the constitution, you're doing this. So the Supreme Court, she had to file this case and file this petition, and then the Supreme Court ruled about doing away with that. The Sabrimala case, again, may not be completely thing, but at least ruling the fact that you cannot discriminate against menstruating women from entering places of religious worship on the grounds that, our religion does not permit this to happen. On the other hand, plenty of cases where the Supreme Court seems to have been, even if not outright ruling against it, wary of ruling in the case. The marital rape case where, they are uncomfortable with it, and they said this is not something that the court can do because it has all other kind of consequences, only the legislature can deal with it. To same-sex marriage, the Supriya Chakravarti case again. They said we can't do that, it has to go back to the legislature. Two cases against the Dalits and tribal communities where the Supreme Court in many of these cases has diluted the Atrocities Act. 2018 case in the Supreme Court, in order to prevent misuse and false accusation, introduced safeguards. And they've done similar thing with the Domestic Violence Act. They look at any provision that is there to protect marginalized communities, the most vulnerable communities, as providing opportunity for misuse of the law, for false accusations. And this is without any empirical study being done. It is the course of the empirical study that I talked, which some women scholars and lawyers have done, is when they talked about the restitution of conjugal rights and the misuse of it. 498A, misuse occurs in this form. When the woman files for divorce or maintenance, the man does not come to even have discussion. The lawyer will keep sending notice, the man will not turn. Then the lawyer will tell the woman, let's file 498A. It's a criminal. Till then it is a civil matter. Because the consequences in civil matter are not as harsh as in a criminal matter, the lawyer will tell the man, don't bother, don't respond, right? Nothing will happen. The moment it is 498A, it means that you can be immediately arrested. The police don't have to wait for the magistrate to give that. It's a cognizable offense. And it is not compoundable. You cannot come to any agreement or, in any other way settle it. Immediately you can arrest the husband, the in-laws, whoever is being named in the FIR. The moment you even mention it, immediately he'll come to the table to discuss. So that's how 498A comes in. And also 498A is misinterpreted by the court. 498A is not for dowry demands. 498A is for cruelty, including mental cruelty, and cruelty in the course of making monetary demands. Dowry demand is made at the time of marriage. But after marriage, there are men who will tell the wife, I want to build a house, go get money from your father. I want to buy a car, get money from your father. I want to get a better job, get money from your father. And then start harassing her for it. None of this is dowry demand. These are not demands made at the time of marriage. Now the problem is the moment you identified as dowry demand, you've got to prove that these demands were made at the time of marriage. Obviously you can't, because these demands were not made then. The need did not arise then. Need has arisen 10 years after marriage, 15 years of marriage. Now they have interpreted that monetary demands as dowry demands, and consequently you fail to prove it, and then it becomes, false case. And again, you have to prove cruelty. Proving cruelty in the criminal system is much more. So even we did a study in 2002. We found that when it comes to family court, courts are quite happy to grant divorce on the grounds of cruelty. If you can convince the court that cruelty had occurred. You've been locked outside the house. You were denied entry into the home, or other kinds of cruelty. The court, if you can convince the judge, will award you, because what is it? It's granting divorce. Accepting whether the judge is totally committed to preserving the marriage. So now it says you have to have counseling. It has to go to the council before it can come to court. right? That this is how you dilute the laws which are there to protect women against violence and scheduled castes against atrocities. Now, in those kind of cases, right, where we are talking about the need to prove cruelty in a criminal justice system, is you to prove beyond reasonable doubt. It's not like if my husband is beating me up, like Prajwal Revanna, who's having sex with that woman, I'm not having sex, who is raping that woman, and he's video recording. I mean, I just can't imagine what kind of mind that is. The woman, when she's getting beaten up, is keeping her phone and recording it. How do you prove? Sometimes the way you have been beaten up may not even show. You don't need to go to the hospital to get treatment unless he's broken a hand or caused other injury. Then you have evidence. So proving cruelty, mental cruelty, how do you prove? Dr. Sheshadri from NIMHANS did, develop a manual to help judges identify evidence of mental cruelty in order to help the judges decide. Right? So when you look at all these cases is when you realize that a lot of it is about interpretation, and unless it is from experience. So we had to tell judges, the Judicial Academy, and for that we had a retired judge, Justice Dalvi, who said, when a woman comes to court asking for relief from domestic violence under the TV Act, or for divorce, you got to realize that is her last resort. Women are socialized into tolerating violence. Very rarely will a woman seek divorce after one slap or one beating. Women are taught that this is part of how marriage works. So they deal with it. Till they fear for their life or the life of their children, they don't go. And they have asked for family to intervene, they've gone to the police to intervene. All of it has either escalated the violence or there has been no effect. Then she thinks this is her last resort, she goes to court. So Justice Dalvi used to tell the judges, if you do not provide the relief she's seeking now, the next time that you'll be dealing with is with an unnatural death case. Either she's killed herself or she's been killed. All the dowry related deaths that we keep reading about. Now, unless judges have empathy or have consciousness raising in order to understand the reality of the experiences of the marginalized groups to which they don't belong, even Justice Gawai, he is a very privileged man. I don't think he can today identify with any ordinary Dalit on the ground and the kind of discrimination they experience. He has gone through a very privileged life. Unless you've been through it or you have the empathy to feel the pain and the experience by listening to others, listen. Even just listening, sometimes you can learn a lot. You're not going to have them interpret the right to equality as meaning creating equal conditions, equal protection of the law. What does it mean? You have the law there, you don't support good laws. Right? You had one, as soon as the 2005 Domestic Violence Act came out, which protected women's right to matrimonial home. One of the first judgments, I forget the name, but I think the Bengali, the judge ruled that they were arguing that the home where they were residing, which was their matrimonial home, belonged to the father. And therefore the judge ruled that the daughter-in-law cannot claim that as a matrimonial home and her right to live there. In our country, a lot of people live with their parents. It's not like they set up a separate home. So how can you say that this is not the matrimonial home and say now the woman has to leave? This is how good laws can be subverted because of the patriarchal mindsets. So what we need to do is change the way we think. Sorry that I've taken more time, but in conclusion, why? Why is this gap between aspirations and the guarantees and the reality? Is a condition of our society. So long as you don't transform the society, you cannot possibly hope for the guarantees to become reality for the most marginalized groups. Transforming society happens through education and through social and economic development. If we targeted these communities, like if you look at child marriage in Karnataka, it happens in North Karnataka by and large. And North Karnataka is the least developed districts in Karnataka. Who are the communities there? The malnutrition, the deficiencies, the lack of access to education. These are the communities who are living there. If you target their upliftment, you will automatically, naturally see that the age at marriage will also increase and child marriage will no longer be practiced. See, accepting where people practice child marriage as a part of their culture, like in Rajasthan, some of the Jat communities where a particular star, comes into the sky, then they will have a whole festival where they get children married to each other. Most of the country where we see it is, girl children being married to adult men. And who are these girl children? I mean, look at the context in Punjab, Haryana. Because of their practice of sex discriminatory abortions, the sex ratio fell, and then they go marry poor girls and young women from Bihar, from Andhra, from Kerala, and then it's not even one brother marrying one woman, it is one woman for two brothers, three brothers, because you got to pay them, the poor families, money in order to buy their daughters. How do you set right these kind of things? Right, so when we say right to equality, equality before the law is fine. When you go to the court, that the court should treat you equally. But equal protection of the law is what we need to deal with. And that is with the state's responsibility, the positive responsibility, obligation the state has in order to make the field a level playing field. Everyone isn't the same. You cannot deal with the law and the situation and the rights as if everybody's requirements are the same. Different people, different needs. And if two different people have to be treated equally before the law, you need to level that field. India is now one of the vulnerable communities going to be the aging population, seniors. They're going to be about 33% of the population in, 15-20 years' time. What are we doing? How are you going to keep them engaged? How are you going to deal with their medical requirements? Because that's one of my concerns now, close to retirement, is like most of the money is going to go towards, buying medicines for dealing with various illnesses and hospitalization and your taxable medical insurance. Post-retirement, you're going to pay a huge amount of money in order to get medical insurance. And you need medical insurance, you don't know when, what will happen. How do we deal with difference? There's a simple thing. Because, we keep looking at people, when we say equality, treating same as same. But people are not same. People are different. And if people have to be treated as equals, then you need to move beyond formal equality to what feminists have argued, substantive equality. Level the playing field. Formal equality is merely equality of opportunities. That's a frustrating thing. To tell everyone is equal. And then to see that you cannot access all those things that are supposed to be yours. Simply because you're a woman, or you're a Dalit, or you're a Muslim, or you're disabled, or you are gay, whatever may be the grounds, or an aged person. So the gap lies in the unequal society in which we are, because while Satyanam talked about ending medievalism based on age, based on birth, etc., we haven't. Those privileges continue into India even on this, the 79th year of independence. Thank you.